Hello. Hello. Start talking.
Okay, spread out. So, welcome to Literary as Feck, where we talk books every couple of weeks. And me, your regular host, Clive Davis, and my other regular host there,
Nick.
And eagle-eyed viewers will probably think, "Ha! Look, these two jokers. They've put a cardboard cutout of Ramsey Campbell in front of a webcam, as if to trick us into thinking that the great man would be on this silly podcast." But lo and behold, it's the man himself. Hello, Ramsey.
Hey, how you doing, guys?
There we go. That's no cardboard cutout.
Oh no.
And yeah, so I mean, well, let's get started here then. I mean, we could explain for those who don't know who Ramsey Campbell is, although I'm sure most people do. But
well, I can quote here.
How do you tend to? Oh, Nick's got it.
We can quote from the Oxford Companion to English Literature describes Ramsey Campbell as Britain's most respected living horror writer. Has been given more awards than any other writer in the field, including, and there's a long list of awards that I could read. But yes, so naturally, being literary as Feck, we have got Ramsey Campbell, one of the world's greatest horror writers, on to talk about the Three Stooges.
Yes, yes.
And now you see them before you. Here we are.
Yeah, these are the new bunch.
Yeah.
Although difficult to assign, I'm not quite sure which one would be which.
If I get a bit more lost in here, I could kind of pull this up and get a bit of Larry going on.
Oh, that's okay. Yes, Larry. That's Larry. Yes, that's right. So it's up to you and me, Clive. Who's Mo? Who's Curly? I don't know.
Well, I would have not to confuse things. I'd love to be Shemp because he's my favorite.
Oh, you're going to confuse me. Yes, I see. Go on then. Go on.
So there you go. You could be Curly, and you'll get all the ladies. So
yes, that's very true. Very true. Yes.
Sounds like a good deal.
Especially about a moustache like yours, actually. If you then had to shave it off.
Yeah, this is true. This is true. So yeah, so I was going to ask Ramsey to do his own self-introduction, but that kind of sorts it out, really. I mean, so I suppose the next question is I would imagine, so Six Stooges and Counting is the book. It's from Electric Dream House, right? They also put out a collection of your Video Watchdog writings as well. Is that right?
They did, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I don't know much about Electric Dream House. If this is a new imprint or
no, it's what it is. It's PS Publishing's film book imprint, and actually they've been going for some years now.
Okay.
I've done lots and lots of monographs. I mean, the latest out is Kate Probert on The Descent, the Descent, the Neil Marshall movie, which she loves, and I'm looking forward to that. But they've done, a whole bunch of other books. And maybe, if you like, I'll explain how I came to do this book for them.
Please do.
It's now Neil Snowden and Guy Adams who run things there. I mean, P.S., Pete and Nikki Crowther. And I think I'm right in saying it was originally Pete who said, to me, once he'd started up this new imprint, because, P.S. have several, and he knew I love movies. Well, obviously, the Video Watchdog thing proves that much. Would I like to do a monograph on a favorite film? I can't now recall whether Night of the Demon, which is my all-time favorite horror movie, had already gone, had been assigned maybe, or it was simply that I wasn't sure I could get 20,000 words out of even, my top favorite movie, whatever it may be. And, they obviously wanted something in the realms of fantasy or the macabre, rather than simply mainstream. So I kind of demurred for a bit, and then we'll come back to my, my initial encounters with the Three Stooges in a bit, obviously.
Oh, yes, we will.
What did occur to me was, well, I'd recently watched the Three Stooges Meet Cinderella, which was their biggest budget film by far and their most prestigious. Really, it was directed by Walter Lang, who made The King and I. So this was a relatively big project for them. The last manifestation of the Stooges. And they're going to have to explain that in due course, because the lineup constantly was changing over the decades. Anyway, I thought maybe I proposed then, what about this movie? And I could do, maybe fill up the book with a lot of, what leads up to their making this film. So, I could talk more about the Stooges in general. But the more I thought about this, the more I thought, I'd like to talk about their entire career. And so I proposed that to them. And, I think it was a little bit of surprise, on Pete and Nicky's behalf. But eventually they took it on, and so there's the book. That explains that.
Okay, that's interesting. So it's very much something that kind of grew like the Blob or something, like out of control.
Oh, believe you me, so it did, because it was several years in the doing, and every time I think I finish the wretched thing, something else crops up, another excrescence, another tentacle or polyp or whatever it might be. And so, with the third printing is due pretty soon.
All right.
And that was some extra stuff in it, in fact, because between my writing the book and, its initial publication and now, a couple of the films that I had declared were lost, because that's what I thought, but they couldn't be seen. Showed up on the internet. Somebody had found a copy and put it up, and so I was able to discuss those as well. So there was a very rare 30s short in which Curly goes off on his own, which he very rarely did. I mean, Moe and Shemp were much more inclined to make films, away from the Stooges proper. But there's this very rare. Minor film, but nevertheless, I'm able to talk about it now, and so it's in there with some other stuff as well.
Oh, that's fascinating. So when did you start? When did you start originally writing the first draft then?
Oh gosh, initially working on it, researching on it would have been, don't know, 6-7 years ago probably. But it was several years in the research. But really, maybe at this point I should go all the way back and explain how I became interested in the Stooges in the first place. Because initially I knew nothing about them, until the early 80s. They were, unknown to me. Now, what happened was this. An old friend, sadly long gone, John Owen, who wrote as Frank Mace, was a member of the Liverpool science fiction group, probably best known in Fanish circles to the extent he is known, because his story was adapted by Bob Bloch, no less, as the Cuckoo Clock for an early Alfred Hitchcock Presents. And in fact, John knew nothing about this, and Bob didn't know he didn't know. But in fact, it was the publishers of the original short story, London Mystery Magazine, had sold the movie rights without John's knowing, because this was back in the 50s, the original story was published. He'd sold off all the rights, without realizing it. One wouldn't do that now, obviously. Anyway, the point was that John always regarded the Stooges as being funnier than and better than Laurel and Hardy. Now, I'm never going that far. Sorry, Laurel and Hardy have my ultimate vote, along with Keaton, I think, as well.
Yeah, but, I don't think you have to. You don't have to plant your flag, right? Because
no, it's not a pecking order, is it? Really?
Yeah, no. Many people, for instance, they would say that the Three Stooges, they're far superior to the much more elegant Marx Brothers or something like that.
Yeah, that's the sort of thing.
It's a very different proposition, and something that the Three Stooges obviously were aware of, because all those hoi polloi type shots are them taking a dig at that sort of attitude.
Yeah. Oh, very much. I mean, Moe would say, they only knock top hats off with the pies. Basically they didn't throw them at ordinary folk, which is perfectly true when you look at it. Anyway, what happened was this: Channel 4 was a bit, well, actually, you might know it, Clive. Maybe it was a British, still is a British television channel. Now, when it was set up and started up in I think it was 84, early 80s anyway. they were a genuinely alternative channel. They really set out to do stuff other channels weren't doing in all sorts of different ways.
Yeah.
And
The
one of
Red
the things
Triangle films, for example.
yes, they did those. Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's right, because they did, Antonioni movies, and because they were supposed to, a bit more so than most. I mean, they showed a Godard film, I remember, so like 3 o'clock in the morning, which had, unknown in those times, an actual male genitalia were on screen and waved at the camera, for that matter.
Well, this is quite interesting as well, because it's a slight
Yeah.
generational gap, because at that point you would have been slightly older, so you would have been maybe just marveling at, my God, these magnificent art house films are being shown on terrestrial TV for the first time. Whereas me and Nick are of the age where we didn't know anything of that, but it was like, oh, we get to see something,
Well, there was a bit of both. Yes, that's certainly right. Don't put me out to be more innocent than I am. Anyway, came Channel 4. One of the things they did was weekday afternoons, they ran a Three Stooges short, about 20 to 2 in the afternoon. Now, I was reviewing lots of films from the BBC locally back then, so I'd often be out in the morning watching a film at a press show. But I would hurry home and, try and make sure that I was there to watch the Stooges movie. And I didn't quite know why I was doing this, because I didn't find them particularly funny. I didn't find them very funny at all. But there was something there that, kept me coming back. And one of the things I've said, I've dealt with in this book, I do believe this, I actually think comedy of all the genres is the one that you need to get acclimatized to enjoy it. In the individual cases, I mean, you don't really need to adjust to somebody's particular style of horror fiction necessarily. But comedy, I think it's different. You need, I think, to get on the wavelength of that particular comedian or that particular comedy team. And so it became, I think, for me, the case with the Stooges. So I watched them all eventually, because Channel 4 were running all the two reelers, the Columbia shorts, I think. I don't know whether they were chronological or not. Anyway, they came to the end of them eventually, and that was that. So, this was probably the late 80s. Nothing much happens after that for me. I rather forgot about them until relatively early in the century, where some good chap at Sony Pictures, obviously a great enthusiast, started issuing slipcase sets of all these short films chronologically, several years per set. And I thought, well, I wouldn't mind having another look at those. So I duly invested in them as they came out, and I looked at them. And I think, well, there's actually more here, and I'm going back to them. And then, of course, came this PS proposal, or the proposal I made to PS. So I determined, well, okay, I'm going to watch all these films chronologically, and I'm going to watch the ones that come after. And there's when Sony had finished issuing all the films in order, the short films, they did an extremely interesting backup set of 3 more DVDs with each of the, whichever of the Stooges made things individually away from the Stooges. You get several examples of those as well, and also of the later people, Joe Besser and Joe DeRita, who eventually came in to take over from Shemp consecutively. They had made short subjects for Columbia too before they were passed over to figure in the Stooges. So you can get several examples of their work as well. It's very useful backup, and I've talked about some of that too in the book. Anyway, so I start watching all the films again chronologically, and eventually move on to the feature films that they made later. And some of the films they made earlier, the very first film is a feature film. And the more I looked, the more I found to talk about. The more interest I found, there would actually seem to be recurring themes and very strange elements of the Stooges films, like gags that are set up and never actually come to fruition. Now, whether this is because Jules White, who was their main director, and actually the main director of short subjects at Columbia, just was on such a tight budget and such a tight schedule that he couldn't do them all. He just, I can't, I have time to finish that gag off. I really don't know. But it almost becomes, a characteristic of the Stooges short films. And Well, Julia, no, I beg your pardon, Bridget Fonda, the great Bridget Fonda. I quote her in the book saying, basically, if you don't like the Three Stooges, you've never really looked. And by the end of looking, I felt the same thing. And from having found them interesting but bewildering to interesting and rewarding, I can now just watch them for enjoyment. And the best of the films actually are really very funny, and there's a whole lot more. And this is one of the crucial points, I think, just as with Lovecraft, there's this fallacy that he's all about overwriting and saying things are too hideous to describe, which of course we all three know is not the case at all. To put it mildly, a great deal more to Lovecraft, a great deal more range to Lovecraft and to his prose. So it's the same with the Three Stooges. They're not all about knockabout. There is a lot of knockabout, but there's a hell of a lot of more stuff, including verbal comedy and sight gags and the rest of it. And in fact, I found this interesting. The only film they actually devised was Punch Drunks, an early two-reeler. But that was their project, and there's there's sort of comic violence goes. Curly gets set off whenever he hears, oh, it's Pop Goes the Wheels. Oh, is it Three Blind Mice? I forget, it's one of the two anyway. Sets him off as berserk, but it's comedy berserk.
Right. I
so
think
they
that's
enter a boxing match, and it's a comic boxing match, very much along the lines of Chaplin and other people, Harold Lloyd, and it's actually very funny. But what it isn't, there's very little sort of slapping and eye poking.
It's true. Yeah.
That's much more what Jules White, as I say, their main director, he tended to impose that. And interestingly, he also made films with Buster Keaton, particularly in the early 30s. And Keaton found White's insistence on knockabout, inimical. It wasn't what Keaton wanted to do at all. So it does feel as if White just, insisted on that with everybody he worked with, or most of the folks he worked with. And when I think it almost feels as if whenever the Stooges could do another kind of comedy, they do their best to do it. And when they do it, they do it extremely well.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned, because also it comes up in the book how Jules White obviously had a bit of a problem with thinking that some of his ideas had been nicked a little bit further on as well. But,
yes, Clyde Brookman, I beg your pardon, worked with Keaton.
Right.
He was and with Harold Lloyd, and eventually I think it was Harold Lloyd sued the studio for pinching ideas from his films, and obviously Brookman's career began to falter at that point. But on the other hand, Jules White, he would rework ideas over and over again through the course of his career, often with different personnel. Again, in the book, I analysed a bunch of films that he made with other people that are kind of like first drafts for some of the films he made with the Stooges. But I think you can argue that, he does rework the gags. He doesn't just repeat the gags.
No, you're right. It's interesting as well, even though in some quarters, in some ways, the so-called auteur theory has been kind of poo-pooed over the years. But if you still follow it to a certain extent, it's interesting how there are these directors who, because they were working within the studios, and no one ever considered, not even the French considered to, assign them the moniker of auteur. But when you have people like that, like consistently reworking similar themes again and again and again, I mean, that kind of fits no one would think of putting Jules White.
So is Jules White a kind of Jess Franco of comedy then?
Yeah, I think that's right.
It was like taking that jazz approach to reworking.
It's like someone like Robert Aldrich as well, right? Who was always working more or less within studio systems. People wouldn't necessarily assign him as all, but clearly he was, right, a man using the studio system to his own ends.
I think so. Yes.
A few things there you brought. Sorry, Nick, if you have any, just stick up your pistachio nuts. But a few things you mentioned there, Ramsey, which
is that a euphemism?
Yeah, I hope so.
Which triggered memories for me were the Channel 4 thing, because I have a feeling before Channel 4 started running them, and I remember seeing them, again, when I was very young, late 80s, I'd heard of the Three Stooges, but I get the feeling they hadn't penetrated UK culture in the way they had in the States.
Yeah, I think that's right. Unlike, say, Laurel and Hardy. I think
Yes, they were on all the time when I was a kid. Laurel and Hardy, Buster Keaton, Chaplin, obviously, and even do you remember Channel 4 would show the lobster comedies, which I think was like a French company that was restoring lots of things like Keystone Cops and stuff like that.
Oh, yes, that's right, they did.
And I grew up especially slightly different, but things that were already ancient by then. But Flash Gordon serials, Buck Rogers, all that stuff was shown. I think they were on BBC Two. But yes, I remember seeing Three Stooges when I was a kid, and also because it wasn't part of my childhood like an American's childhood, took me a little while to warm up.
Yes.
And you were saying there is that acclimatization, and the only thing I can think of an analog later on in the 90s, I remember when The Fast Show was first on BBC Two. I remember watching all of that through, and I'd taped it as well, luckily, back in those days, and just not quite sure if it was funny or not, because it took me one run through, and then watching it back a second time, I was like, oh, okay, no, this is actually something quite special. But totally, I remember the reason I went back to rewatch it, actually, because I was an avid listener of John Peel, and he was on it straight away. He was like, this is brilliant, you should watch this. And then he sent me back, and then like exactly like you said, once you kind of understand what it is, then you can relax and enjoy it as comedy.
Yes, I mean, I think the great example of this, or one great example anyway, is Monty Python. I mean, if you watch the earliest episodes of that, it's absolutely clear the audience is completely bewildered. What the hell is going on? Are we supposed to laugh? What are we doing here? Although I do gather that the early audiences were, middle-aged ladies who'd come in thinking it was something else entirely, it may explain something. But as the series progresses, you can gradually, hear the audience getting it. And eventually people laugh at Terry Gilliam's, title animation sequence. But they certainly didn't in the early days.
No, that's true, if you...
Unlike The League of Gentlemen, where I think you need to have a laughter track to tell you it's supposed to be a comedy, because often enough it's more like a horror movie. I mean, barely disguised, if even that.
One of my you carry on. My cat is making a very disturbing noise, so I have to go.
Oh dear! Well, we're not going to see these cartons fall on your head, are we? For heaven's sake! I mean, we don't have to go that stooge-like.
I think it's funny. I was thinking back to when maybe I would have first seen the Stooges, and it was definitely in Ireland in the 80s with my dad, and it must have been on TV because there wasn't, even the VCR. Didn't enter rural Ireland until, very much the later 80s, 87, 88. The first time I remember people having like a home video recorder. So definitely would have been through TV. And I remember then, and my dad loving the Three Stooges and watching it with him and my brother and like falling about laughing. And then really in a way, they completely fell off of my radar for like the better part of 40 something years until reading the book, reading this, and then obviously setting myself the task in order to talk about it and going back and watching as many of the certainly the Columbia shorts as I could. And then I kind of smattering in of other stuff. And it made perfect sense to me why I liked it then, but I would say I like them far more now.
Oh, good.
And I think more than anything else, what comes through is the anarchy, right? Is the ungovernable force. The one episode where they're running around screaming super service and bumping into each other, and I was just killing myself laughing at the energy of it all, like just the panic energy. And then and as you've done an amazing job. So I've gone through the book here, you can see it, and I've marked just some of the
I'm more of a barbarian. I turned down the
but there's like the breadth of your allusions, the breadth of the references that you make to places that you see the Stooges or the connective tissue you see. It's one of my favorite parts of the book was seeing.
Thank you.
My goodness, Ramsey just made a reference to like Zero for Conduct
Yeah.
Jean Vigo, or now,
Sammo Hung.
yeah, or yeah.
Yeah, oh yes, definitely. Well, I mean, of course, when it was proposed to make a film about the Three Stooges, or I think it's actually the Farrelly brothers Three Stooges movie. So it's not about them; it's a kind of recreation of them. People were suggesting Sammo Hung ought to play Curly, and it would have made sense, I think. Sure.
Yeah. Well,
he just
has. The thing is, he has more or less in all sorts of films, right? He has.
Yes.
Yeah. So even though it's not official, and plus as well, I think Hong Kong film in general gets a special dispensation about remaking stuff all the time, but without necessarily acknowledging what they're
yeah, I think that's true. Much like Indian cinema, yeah.
Yes.
I remember being surprised by how much Curly reminds me in these of, and I guess it's Alexei Sayle reminding me of Curly in some of what Alexei Sayle was doing in the 80s. Some of the physical comedy he was doing, and his appearances on the Young Ones.
Yeah.
Seeing a certain amount of Curly in there.
That never occurred to me. Damn! Well, that's got to go for the fourth printing
then.
We're here to keep you employed.
Well, absolutely.
I mean, I do think that Ade Edmondson and Rick and him, there was an element of knockabout to
oh yes,
and to the Young Ones, etc. That I think is very much, rooted in the Stooges.
Sure, I think you're right.
And speaking of the Stooges, funnily enough, years ago when I read this book, Please Kill Me, which is the history of punk, there's a section near the end where one of the other Stooges, Ron Ashton, talks about having visited Larry Fine after his strokes and helping him answer his fan mail, and them developing a strange intergenerational Stooge relationship. Which is quite cool.
Yeah, sure is. Well, I mean, there is quite a number of rock bands that have done, Stooge stuff. There's the Curly Shuffle, for instance. I mean, there's lots of stuff out there.
Well, I think it appeals to anyone who questions authority. Anyone who, I think that there's absolutely something that's so liberating about the Stooges, and as you said, so much of that stuff is about kind of bringing people down a notch, or exploding a high society soiree, or
So we should say as well. I mean, you have mentioned this, but I think maybe. So first, well, there's two things I want. First of all, I would say one balance that you've got right. One problem I have sometimes with film criticism in general is when people bang on a bit too much about what happens in a film before actually critiquing it, because it's always like, well, if I've already seen it, I don't want to just read what I've already seen, and then if I haven't seen it, then it's equally as irrelevant, really. But you get the balance right, and extraordinarily across what looks like a relatively slim volume when you pick it up. You have pretty much explained not only the shorts, but and we'll get onto this, all the other stuff as well. And it's all done pretty zippily, and it just what happens sometimes as well is I'm tempted, this is the plot pad, I'll skip it till the critique part. But no, it's all mixed in, and it's fun for me because I've seen the majority of these shots before, but it's fun for me to remember, this one, and then also you throw in it's just the right mix. I think that it's incredibly, it's a page turner. It didn't take me long to read this at all. I would go to the bath where I do most of my reading.
As do I.
Yes, and
I compulsively read this. There was some long bath.
But I'm still reading. So well done for that.
Oh, I should say this is completely an aside, but when this book showed up, so I ordered this, and it's quite snowy here in Canada, and this showed up around during the kind of the winter holidays, and somebody had thrown it out of an Amazon truck into a snowbank. It was like stuck in its like this in a cardboard sleeve. Yeah, and I was like, well, that's perfect. So then I bring it inside, and then I dry the book out, and then I left it sitting on the back of the sofa, and then it fell and hit me in the head. And I thought, this is, yes.
Well, no, that's great, but I'm amazed that people. I've probably been here in Japan too long, but I think if anyone were to do that here, that would be you would get a complaint that someone would throw.
Yeah.
Oh, that's very much how things are delivered on Prince Edward Island.
And in England, yeah.
Wow. Okay. Interesting. I've learned something I didn't expect.
But I would second what Clive said. I found myself sitting in baths that were, stiff stone cold because I spent too long.
With that in mind, I did want to point out something. So yes, that's all well and good. Ramsey takes on the Columbia shorts 194, is that right?
Gosh, I didn't count, but sounds good.
Something like that. But beyond that, you also do the Ted Healy stuff, the early on stuff. Also the features, and Cook's tour and stuff like this, which we can talk about, which is very interesting. But there's also the additional kind of stuff. So there was a TV movie, which was basically the Three Stooges story. Yes. Which I've only read 2 other Stooges books other than yours. I've read I Stooge to Conquer, the Mo Howard autobiography, which is quite a lot of fun, actually.
Yes, well worth having, yes.
And then this one, The Three Stooges, an Illustrated History.
Yes.
Are you familiar with it? I'm sure you've probably read all the Three Stooges.
I've not read that one, no, actually, now you mention it. No.
From Amalgamated Morons to American Icons. It's by Michael Fleming.
Yes, okay. Yep.
And this was a tie-in for the TV movie. And executive producer Mel Gibson.
Yes.
Forward. It's quite a good introductory little text.
Well, yes, I mean, he's a great fan of Mel Gibson. Obviously, if anybody who's seen Lethal Weapon will remember him doing the Stooges.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. Yeah. It's funny in retrospect. You do wonder, like, did Mel Gibson? I mean, knowing everything else we know about Mel Gibson, did he not figure out they were Jewish? Because that might have been a problem. But he seems to have overlooked that for the Three Stooges.
That's something I do quite enjoy as well, is any of the shorts where they're having a go at the Nazis. They seem very timely these days, but also because obviously the fact that they're 3 Jewish gentlemen having a at
but I think my argument is there's more of an edge to them than much as the great dictator. We wouldn't be without it, but I think there's a little bit more rancor in the suit, and particularly in Moe's portrayal of Mo Hailstone, Adolf Hitler. And he actually slipped in a couple of Yiddish vulgarities in the course of his rant, which is interesting.
No, I would agree with you there. I mean, I think you might hold Great Dictator in slightly higher regard than I do, but I've always had a bit of a problem with Great Dictator, in so much as I understand it was massively important at the time, and but Chaplin's satirical take on it isn't. It's not particularly satirical, right? He just plays him as a kind of buffoon, right?
Yeah,
which I guess whatever at the time probably would have been, better than appeasement at the very least. But I agree with you. What the Three Stooges did with that is a lot more
pointed. It's 2 fingers in the eyes.
This is true. But so the other things are, so you do get on to so just today actually I had never watched Stooge Mania before.
Yes.
A 1985 film with Josh Mostel, Zero's son, I guess.
Yeah.
And not a great film by any means, but I have to admit I had a certain amount of goodwill towards it, because it is set in a world where there's seems to be a a COVID-19 like epidemic where everyone starts, or men at least, start acting like the Three Stooges.
That's right. That's right.
And yeah, it's kind of interesting. It's an odd one. I'd never caught up with it before, but reading a book reminded me of it, so I thought I would check it out. And it's quite interesting, I would say.
Yeah. It's quite rare, I think, actually. I think you can only find it online.
Yeah, it's different. I remember it was released here in Japan because I remember seeing Japanese VHS in a rental store a long time ago. But at the time, for whatever reason, I'd ignored it because I suppose when I first moved here in '99, I was busy renting all the films that were still video nasties in the UK. And
Yeah.
how times have changed. But so the other thing, which is quite interesting, is, and I was very pleased to see, is that you're positive about the Farrelly Brothers remake, because I thought that was very well done.
It's very funny. I mean, it's very inventive. And I thought, I'm particularly about the fact, that everything that Stooge fans want are in there somehow. But it's always a variation. It's not just a replication. They've put their own little twist on. Much like Jules White rewriting his gags or reworking his gags. They rework favorite moments from the Stooges and give them an extra lease of life, I think.
No, it's because I remember it coming out and being very trepidatious, because at that point I'd become a bit of a fan and thinking, oh, I don't know about this, and just more than anything else, the sense of relief that it wasn't awful, I think.
Yes.
And more than that, it was actually quite funny. And then, so especially the I forgot his name, the guy who plays Moore, Chris something. He has quite a long Greek name.
Yes.
He's very good. He's also in Silicon Valley, and he played. There was a TV movie about the making of Mork and Mindy.
Oh, right, yeah.
And he plays Robin Williams.
Right.
And he is a fantastic mimic. He does Moore, he does Robin Williams. I mean, he's a very talented man. I think he does lots of voices as well for animations and stuff like that.
Speaking of that, by the way, that was one thing that jumped out at me very strongly upon going back to the Stooges and watching them. I was within just one or two shorts when it started to drive me mad who Larry Fine's voice reminded me of. Because I was like, what? Like, I know this voice, and I don't think it's from the memories of childhood that far back. And it turns out that that Billy West, who did the voice for Stimpy in the 90s Ren and Stimpy cartoon, which I was obsessed with as a kid, that's all he's doing. And he's very upfront. He said, all I did was, I'm just doing Larry from the Three Stooges.
Right.
And then the other voice, Ren, is a sort of a composite of Peter Lorre, and with a Mexican tinge. That is the binary opposition that they've created. But it's uncanny. If you close your eyes, I can just see this cartoon cat in place. And then when I went and watched a few of the later, like the Three Stooges, the new Three Stooges, right, which had the cartoon segments, which are then have live action scenes between them. It was even more strange to hear the real Larry Fine's voice coming out of a cartoon character.
Oh yeah.
Sort of kind of overlap in my mind.
Yes, absolutely. So they're infinitely malleable, basically. I think their input extends in every direction.
And I think you're right. You say something about how even within the kind of the troupe, like they will borrow each other's bits as needed, and there's no sense of proprietary. It's all about the gag. Everything is at the service of being funny. And that's some of the ones where they end shorts by almost like they've just like run a car into a tree and walked away. Like they feel it's so abrupt.
Yeah, no, it's great.
That's the end. What? I love.
It's funny in that respect, and the whole how they come in and disrupt certain hoi polloi parties and stuff. And to your point, Ramsey, you mentioned a few times how this could be in a Buñuel film or something like that. And those abrupt endings, I mean, like for instance, Buñuel's the end of his Simon of the Desert
Oh gosh,
where they
yes.
suddenly, cut to New York City and they're dancing the radioactive flesh.
Mm,
And you
yeah.
think, wow, that's just like an end of a
Yeah.
Stooges film. Like,
Well,
that's
or indeed,
fantastic.
the exterminating angel. That's pretty Stooge-like at times.
Yes.
Not least the ending. I mean, all of a sudden, apparently revolutionists broke out or something else off screen, and the sheep flee into the church. The end. But that's Buñuel, inimitable, I think.
Yeah, I think so. And it's fantastic because I think it's something we don't get necessarily from. I mean, I'm growing up working class myself and being a bit of an autodidact. I've always appreciated stuff that comes, up from the depths, as it were.
Oh yes, yeah.
Flowers in the dustbin.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
nice to see when there is that overlap, and yeah, you just imagine people maybe getting into a bit of don't quite know how to. Which category do I put this in? And you're like, well, deal with it because this is from the streets, and
Yeah.
and so we should. I mean, we could probably talk all day, but before we do, we should probably talk about the elephant in the room, which I'm going to rephrase that from now on, I think, and not to be mean about it, just it's worth talking about. Let's talk about the Besser in the room.
Ah, yeah.
Actually, before we do,
okay.
Just for a second, I should say that. So, because when I first experienced the Stooges, I was very young. I wouldn't have made a clear differentiation in my head between any of the ones who kind of look like Curly. Like I would have probably not understood that Joe and Curly Joe were not just Curly, right?
I don't know. I think even as a child, maybe all the others, but Joe Besser, you would.
Yeah, Joe, I probably would have, if I'd even seen any of his. I definitely saw some of Curly Joe when I was a kid.
And again, trying to stay positive, and to be fair as well to Ramsey, this is something you not dance around. I don't think that's fair to say, but you don't turn into an attack dog all of a sudden when it comes to the Joe Besser years. But I'm guessing, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm guessing that's not because you love the Joe Besser stuff as much as the other, but it's just the book's not about that, right? So, but I think it is worth mentioning. I mean, I've watched most of the shorts, and the majority of the stuff that I've got left to watch is the Joe Besser stuff, and I'm slightly trepidatious. And it's not because I dislike Joe Besser himself. It's just that, well, what he does doesn't really fit. Because I'm wondering, have you, in re-watching and thinking about this, and have you come at all to a deeper appreciation of Joe Besser, or what are your thoughts on Joe Besser there?
Well, let's just explain to the folk who may not know all this in a very capsule form that one of the things that I found fascinating, one of the things that got me into wanted to look more closely was that as I think I said earlier on, the personnel were in not constant flux, but they changed quite a bit. So what happens is, initially, the Three Stooges on stage with Ted Healy are in fact Moe, Larry, and Shemp. Shemp then gets out because he objects to some of Ted Healy's behaviour off stage and off screen, and then the younger brother of Moe and Shemp, Jerome, who then becomes Curly, is brought in, and he's not really done any comedy before, but he clearly is this immense comic talent. I mean, personally, for me, the funniest of the Stooges, I certainly have a lot of time for Shemp as well, and all of them, the originals, if you like. So in the mid-40s, Curly has a major stroke, and in fact, before the end of a film, which is Half-Wit's Holiday, he's unable to continue, and the pie fight ends the film without him, which is a disconcerting moment in itself. Shemp then comes back in to replace him, and until the 50s. Shemp dies, and then Joe Besser is brought in, and now we need to talk about Joe Besser. It sounds like the title of a novel, doesn't it? We need to talk about Kevin. We need to talk about Joe, who is not quite as terrible,
not as menacing as Kevin. No,
that's right. the thing with that, I think there are a couple of factors going on here. I absolutely agree with you, Clive, that he doesn't fit in. What he does do, and which is, I'm afraid I resent, continue to resent, is he tries to remake the dynamic of the Stooges. I mean, not really by almost domesticating them and toning them down, but even in a couple of the shorts, bizarrely, he apparently has persuaded them to abandon their famous hairstyles, you know, and become more conventional. What he appears to try to do is conventionalize them. But now, we have to say it's not entirely his fault. First of all, what's happening at the same time is that the Stooges films have been released to children's television in America, and they're being shown on, you know, Saturday morning shows. Now, this means that stuff that was made in the 30s for, you know, adults, basically, you know, about the Depression, and in the 40s, a lot of it for servicemen, is a bit much for the parents who are watching with their kids. And people start, you know, writing in or ringing in, objecting to all the eye pokes. So these are now, the knockabout is toned down. And Joe Besser is obviously one factor in this whole kind of, you know, softening of the Stooges.
Yeah.
Well, so I mean, in some ways, one assumes that, you know, the studio supported or even generated this. But I think the problem is he doesn't. He brings his comic persona to the team, and it, as I think you have implied, it doesn't really work.
No.
Weirdly enough. And I can't now, without looking it up, remember which one this is, but one of the Besser shorts has by far the most revolting scene in any of the Stooges, well, apart from the killing of the Japanese internees in one of the 40s films, right, which is very disconcerting and, you know, quite at odds with what the kind of violence we normally associate with the
Different
Stooges,
types.
comedy violence. But there's a scene in which Joe Besser, posing as a child in I just forget which one, has to eat a cigar. You know, it's supposedly a chocolate cigar, but it's not. And it's pushed to the point where it genuinely becomes emetic, both on the screen and, so far as I'm concerned anyway, for the audience. You know, it's nothing like Chaplin eating his boots in The Gold Rush. It's just kind of revolting.
Yeah,
and it goes
yeah,
on
yeah,
and on and on and on. And we keep coming back to it, you know. It doesn't work for me at all.
No.
Then Joe DeRita comes in at the end when Besser, you know, to be fair, to Besser, probably a perfectly nice chap, has to go and look after his wife who's fallen ill. So Joe DeRita is brought in. Now, interestingly enough, this goes back to what I was saying about the kind of bonus set of shorts that Columbia did. Joe DeRita had a very distinct comic personality, but he reshapes it to be more like Curly in the films that he makes with Moe and Larry. And so he kind of fits in, but it's only like watching, you know, something of a carbon copy, really. You know, he does his best, and more power to him, but he's no Curly. And so
No. But
the final lineup.
Nick was saying about getting them confused. I understand if you were a child and you saw the Three Stooges features as shorts. Yeah, it's not that difficult to imagine that they were more or less the same. I think the thing with Joe Besser as well, which is problematic nowadays, is that because his persona is quite camp, I would say. Yeah. Then back in the day, it wasn't, you know, it wouldn't have been a problem. It was just, it didn't fit. This is not what the Stooges do, and they're not hitting each other or whatever. But I think nowadays, if you were to complain about the intrusion of Joe Besser, it almost seems like you're being homophobic, and that's not what it is at all. It's not that. It's not the fact that he's camp. That's not the problem. It's fine if it was just Joe Besser by himself, but it just doesn't gel with what the Stooges doing.
I think that's right.
But it's interesting to consider. So obviously Joe Besser. So in answer to my question, then obviously no, you haven't particularly warmed up to Joe Besser.
No. They're the films I'd watch least often, certainly. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So how about then? We mentioned the remake and the TV movie, and I mentioned Stooge Mania briefly. Is there any Stooge related or kind of marginalia or something that you think people should be more aware of
Oh gosh, there's so much, isn't there? But I mean, some people probably are aware of. I mean, the Simpsons seem to contain dozens of Stooge gags.
Oh, yeah.
In all sorts of different ways. Probably the most bizarre. And here I think we come back to Binuel. There's one episode in which Homer and Principal Skinner are two wise men who kind of slap each other around. And there's Bart with a halo in a crib in a nativity scene. And that's coming awfully close to Binuel. And I would have thought awfully close to things that people might object to, or Ned Flanders might at any rate. So there's that. Quentin Tarantino. Now, here we go. Who apparently regards all his films as comedies. So there you are. Make of that what you will. I mean, that's putting stoogedom to its extreme. But he made a short film which was shown on. Is it Conan O'Brien? I think was the talk show. Yeah, okay. Tarantino was on there. You can find this online. And he made a short black and white movie with three guys, looking something like the Stooges. And they do, the knockabout routine. But his point is, what would happen if you poke someone in the eyes and you poke the eyes out, literally out, And this is comedy, because it's so horrific. So
I don't know about this, I have to admit. When was this? Which era are we talking about?
Gosh, I can't remember now. Whenever Conan O'Brien was around doing his
90s probably.
Show.
Okay.
You can certainly find this. Yeah. If you look at it, look for, I think, Quentin Tarantino, Three Stooges online. That should pop it up on YouTube.
Yeah, I will. Yeah.
And then, well, I suppose that the most significant of all, in some ways, is Sam Raimi,
right,
and Robert Tappert, and Bruce Campbell, and the rest of those guys. I mean, before Evil Dead, which clearly, and Evil Dead 2, where I think the Stooge influence is even more apparent. And, Bruce Campbell turned into a one-man stooge, Three Stooges at some point, I think.
I was really shocked by the hand puppet.
Yes,
the thing on the wall in the one of the Shemp one. I was like, oh, that's as you pointed out. And then when I saw it, I was like, no, it really is exactly recreated in Evil Dead 2 with the deer.
Absolutely, that's right. That's right.
Wasn't there? I can't remember if it was Spiegel or there was a. Was it called Jerks of All Trades? They did kind of have a feature film in the late 90s or something.
Which
was
right.
And then there's Crime Wave as well, right?
Crime Wave, yeah.
Crime Wave is
very stoogey.
Yes, it is. But before all that, they actually made 8mm movies in which they recreated Stooge comedies, or something recreated, and to some extent just used the title and did their own thing with Stooge type gags.
Yeah, well, they even used the same soundtrack, I think, sometimes, didn't they?
Yeah, they did.
Acted out to it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly so.
So yeah, no, I mean, obviously the influence is far and wide, right? And as this book attests to. So
indeed, I do my best. I do my best. And Samuel Beckett, don't forget him, he's in there.
yes.
Yeah.
Pasolini gets a couple of name drops.
Yes, he does.
Yes, 8-diagram pole fighter was another one.
That one surprised me.
I was not expecting to see Alexander Fusheng's name in a book about the Stooges.
No, that one.
Not an obvious connection, no.
No, because I've read a lot of your columns over the years for Video Sugar as well, and I don't remember Kung Fu coming up a lot, but it turns out you know a lot more about Kung Fu than I thought you did.
Oh well, yes, I'm my mind is a sponge basically, and I'm increasingly becoming resembling one.
Now here's a question I have for both of you, and so as I've been going through this process of watching all of the shorts again and talking a lot about the Stooges in my home, I've realized that my wife is not on board with the Stooges at all. No, and that's never been. And I wondered and I don't want to be
the age-old question I suspect is coming up.
Yeah, I don't want to be making crass generalizations, but is it true that the Stooges do tend to appeal more to men and slapstick in general? Because I would say it's not just the Stooges, but generally speaking, my wife doesn't have a lot of tolerance for slapstick, and I get along very well with slapstick. But I'm wondering, is it actually true?
I think to an extent it probably is. I mean, Jenny, my wife, she's come to Laurel and Hardy certainly, but her great love is Buster Keaton in this general sort of area, and the Marx Brothers, particularly with Keaton. We've just been rewatching all the lovely restorations on Eureka Blu-rays, and they're astounding, you know. And actually, I mean, I'm getting off the point slightly here, but we watched Our Hospitality, and by gum, have you seen that recently? The waterfall scene, absolutely terrifying. I mean,
yeah,
you know, we all know about Jackie Chan, the Jackie Chan ward in Hong Kong Hospital, you know, where full of his stuntmen and so forth, and Jackie Chan himself, often enough. But by gum, have a look at the finale of Our Hospitality, and you know, it's true. Absolutely terrifying. And, you know, the timing in that, if that had gone wrong, well, one doesn't like to think what the result would have been.
No, it's interesting, actually. There is a very interesting thing with, yes, as you said, people know about, like Jackie Chan, for example, and they might not necessarily draw the line between, Douglas Fairbanks and Buster Keaton and him, but also even within the industry. So, for instance, if you're looking at the Hong Kong, Taiwanese action film industries of the 70s and 80s, you can watch, even if I don't remember I can't even remember what the film was called. I was watching this rather obscure Taiwanese action film, and there's a scene which has nothing to do with the plot, where one of the main characters in the foreground, a car is speeding towards him. He jumps straight up, the car goes underneath him, and he just lands. And it has nothing to do with the plot. It doesn't have to be there. It could have killed him, but they were doing this like just another day at work. And same as back in the silent days, that like you said, that we know about Harold Lloyd hanging off the clock and stuff like that, the 50 last. But you dig deeper, even into things that are not so well known, there are people risking their life and limb. It's quite extraordinary.
I always think about in the Seven Samurai that there are those scenes of people being shot with arrows as they're riding by horseback, and that they just had pieces of the 2x4 wood underneath their costumes, and somebody with expert aim was firing actual arrows to the wood blocks.
Well,
I mean, good God. I mean, Mifune at the end of Throne of Blood, for heaven's sake. Well, if one of those arrows had gone astray, that would have been, we wouldn't have seen many more of his films, I suspect.
Well, the Japanese film industry and TV hasn't moved along that long, I'll let you know, because I was on a job a couple of days ago in the freezing ground of Gunma, and we had a small 10-year-old child in a hole in the ground for most of the day. So, it's still a little bit the Wild West or the Wild East, I guess. So, yes, so obviously we don't want to take up, I mean, we'd be happy to, but you're a busy man, Ramsey. We don't want to take up all your time, and you've been very generous with us today.
My pleasure, my pleasure.
So, I mean, is there anything you haven't said or feel?
Well, it's a great deal. Great deal I haven't said, but you know.
Don't tempt us, we'll have you here all day.
No, that's true. Well, look, I'll tell you what I'm going to do, because I'll quote myself, and what I hope, I'm still visible to you, am I not? I hope.
You are, yeah.
Oh, good. Because what I'm doing, I'm cheating. I'm just going to look at my book, and what I think I'll do, I'll round off if you like. And I just put in the introduction a few films that I recommend to people if they want to give the Stooges another chance, or if they want to get to know about the Stooges. A few of the short films that I particularly recommend. So. I mean, Disorder in the Court, I think, is great. That's almost no knockabout in that. It has Curly's great scene when he can't quite take the oath and keep his hat on as well.
Will you please take off your hat?
That's right. Now, interestingly enough, I mean, Buster Keaton had done that for Jules White several years earlier. But I actually think that Curly probably very slightly has the edge. I think he's slightly funnier. And that's fighting talk for sure. So, you know,
I think the thing there is just that Curly is just a bit more charming. I mean, you were saying earlier about Buster Keaton and your missus. I think Buster Keaton is a little bit forgotten because he had the stone face. There's something a bit of the sex symbol of Buster Keaton as well, right? He was, and Curly obviously was not short of female companionship, but in an atypical way. Whereas Buster Keaton is not a million way now with a high cheekbones, like nowadays Timothy Chalamet or someone like that. So he was, anyway, carry on, sorry.
Okay, so there's that. There's Punch Drunks, which we talked about, which is, their boxing movie and their one, and probably their most personal short film. There's Men in Black, which is nothing to do with Tommy Lee Jones. It's a parody of Men in White, which is about, people working in a hospital. As the famous line, the famous summons Dr. Howard, Dr. Fine, Dr. Howard turns up, all over the place in rock music and in various other places too. Now, violent is the word for curly, which is a terrible misnomer. It sounds like one because, of course, he isn't, and he certainly isn't in that particular film. What the point was that it was a parody of a title of a film then current called Valiant is the word for carry. But obviously, we've all forgotten that. But it is one of the funniest films. It has got the famous alphabet song.
Similarly, the title wordplay, actually, oddly enough, Mo Howard's autobiography, I Stooge to Conquer, the gag there doesn't quite work for modern audiences either.
Yes.
People have forgotten the I stoop to conquer sort of.
Well, yeah, that's right. Sadly so, yes, sadly. You Nasty Spy, which is where we talked about a little bit, which is the great Hitler parody. Squareheads of the Round Table. We're getting on to Shemp now, I think, and Who Done It. Those are two more. I think really, if folks want to give them a chance, you may find, after that, you'll want to see more of them as well.
There's one as well. I forget the title because I watched it a very long time ago, and I haven't been writing. I write about other things, but I haven't been writing about these. But I do remember there's a Three Stooges shot, which has the Three Stooges, a man in a gorilla suit, but it's a man in a gorilla suit brandishing a machine gun, which I think is all you need for entertainment.
I think that's all you need, absolutely. And that's why there's an entire mini essay in the book about gorillas and people in gorilla and apes.
I was very pleased to hear because I'm a long-term fan of Ray Crash Corrigan.
And Crash
what's his name? Charles Gimora and all of those people. I think if you ever do another monograph, actually, Ramsey, outside of your horror writing, I think it might have to be a men in gorilla suits overview.
Featuring Robot Monster, I hope, then.
I think so. I think so.
I'll say one more thing, and you do a good job of bringing this up in the book. Is that there are parts of certain shorts that if you removed the kind of the comedy sound effects that could play as straight horror, ones where like radial arm saws are brought very close to his face. In fact, Mo often seems to be the one in the most peril in those kind of scenes, or in the garage where his head's stuck in a pipe and things. That I thought, wow, it's uncomfortably intense moments. And then you mentioned that one of the scenes in a Lucio Fulci movie that has like a similar kind of but not played for humor, played for horror. But
that's right. Well, the one thing we mustn't forget to tell people about is what this book is really about. It's proving that Stanley Kubrick's The Shining is an extended Stooge tribute. We won't tell you why. You've got to read the book.
Yes, that is a strong argument.
Right. There we go. Sourced, the horses, well footnoted. Yes. Well, thank you ever so much, Ramsey Campbell. This has been a delight and a joy.
Absolutely.
Gentlemen, thank you for having me.
I hope you've enjoyed a little bit.
I have.
And punching above our weight here, but just to mention, if you ever want to come on at any time to talk films, comics, books, you have an open invitation.
Absolutely.
We'll certainly be doing a Ramsey Campbell influenced From Hell It Came and Sting of Death at some point. So, thank you very much. And also this book generally, I mean, I don't know how you can say this without, because obviously you have a guest on, you're going to say it anyway, but not blowing smoke up anyone's ass. This actually is a fantastic read.
No, it's incredible. You can see how well read it is.
Six Stooges and counting. And I think the important point is the subtitle, a personal tribute.
I think so. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, gentlemen, in which case, thank you again.